Welcome to the Rev Up Dental podcast. On this show, we interview successful dentists, consultants, and industry professionals on how to start, grow, and sell your dental practice. In this episode, we talk to Dr. Sarah Blair, who purchased a small practice and more than tripled the production and active patient count in just a few years. After finishing dental school at Marquette University, she went on to work as an associate for two established practices in Wisconsin. Initially, she had hoped to work towards a partnership with the goal of eventually purchasing and taking over one of the practices. But for a number of reasons, that opportunity never panned out, and Sarah decided to purchase a small local practice instead and turn it around. And it was a huge success. In this interview, Sarah goes over the early challenges that she faced when taking over the practice, what she did to reactivate and retain the existing patient base, what she did to drive new patients to the practice, to grow and engage the team, and ultimately how she was able to sell the practice a few years later for a significantly higher price than what she had paid for it. After selling the practice, she and her business partner, Marquette, decided to open Indy practices, a boutique consulting firm specializing in leadership training with the goal of helping dentists reach an elite level of leadership, practice management, and profitability. I hope you enjoy the interview. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Hey, it's really great to be here. Thanks for having me, Nick.
So let's start with, what made you want to become a dentist? There's a lot of, if you have, the quote I've heard always is, if you're smart enough to get into medical school, you could pretty much have gone into anything else. So what made you want to become a dentist?
Sure. Well, I actually always wanted to be a veterinarian. So I actually went to veterinary school for a couple of years, and I realized that wasn't the right path. So I took a step back and I actually worked in the real world for a long time before deciding to go back to graduate school, and ultimately realized that dentistry was the perfect combination of, I love science, I love healthcare, I love helping people and creating a great experience for people, but it's also a blend of some artistry and some creativity that I like too. And unlike a lot of other healthcare professions, you have the opportunity to be a bit more independent and to potentially own your own business.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of medical professions where you're kind of like forced into the public system and to all the bureaucracy. So at least as a dentist, you can still dabble with that entrepreneurship element.
Yes.
So when you started, most dentists, they tell us, they worked as an associate for a while, kind of like trying to learn the ropes. What is the path you took? Like, so you finished school, you're now a dentist. Did you work for a different practice? What happened in those early years?
Yeah. So right out of dental school, so I graduated from Marquette, which is in Wisconsin. I graduated in 2013. And I immediately got two jobs as an associate at two different private practices. And that was actually a really awesome opportunity because I got to see a wider variety of different ways there's a million different ways to do everything in dentistry. There's a million different ways to practice and a million different ways to set up your office. So I got to see a wide variety right from the very beginning, which was really cool. So I really valued those two different experiences. And I had the conversations with those two different practice owners about buying in, becoming a partner with them. And ultimately, it just wasn't going to work out with either one of those for a variety of reasons, which is really common. So ultimately, we decided that, hey, just going ahead and buying our own business, our own practice is going to be the better option. And so did an extensive search for that, looked at a lot of different options, including doing a startup, doing a scratch practice. And so really weighing all the options, found what seemed to be the perfect practice. Nothing is perfect, but it was a great opportunity. A dentist who had been really slowing down. He was nearing retirement, but also had some unexpected health things come up. And so his practice had really been suffering as a result. So it was, in a sense, like a startup. There were a lot of aspects of doing a startup because it was such a small practice to begin with.
Now, I'm curious, you mentioned that you had a conversation with those two practice owners. And, would you recommend that, if you're an associate, and you're thinking of maybe buying in, is this a conversation you should have early on, or is it maybe a mistake to have this conversation and you kind of like feel out the practice a little bit? Because I've seen a number of dentists, they essentially buy into the practice. The current principal becomes an associate. They kind of swap roles. So I'm curious, what advice would you give other dentists in this position? Is this something you should bring up early? Because I almost fear that, you need to have a plan B. Like you said, for a number of reasons, it might not work out. They might not really be a good fit. And you don't want to wait too long before figuring this out, because I've heard a number of stories in other industries where, they thought that eventually if I work hard enough, I'm going to make partner, only for them to, the partners to tell them like, yeah, we're not accepting anyone else. We're happy with you just being our employee for the rest of your life. So yeah, any advice around that? Would you bring this conversation up early or not at all? Or, how would you handle it if you could do it again?
I mean, to say that it often doesn't work out is an understatement. I think it usually doesn't work out. And I think that's because there's not an alignment of expectations. And both parties make some assumptions from the beginning, and the discussion is put on the back burner and nobody really wants to talk about it. And that could be really okay if your intention is to just gain experience, to learn while you're there with the plan of moving on eventually. So I think a plan B is absolutely essential, because you should know going into it that just statistically, it's highly unlikely that you're all going to be on the same page and come to an agreement. So the sooner the better. I mean, if you do have intentions of becoming an owner and you think this might be the one, talk about it before day one. Ideally get something in writing before day one about what's going to happen, because the last thing you want to do is work for someone else's business, contribute to their business and grow it so that it's now actually much more valuable based on your hard work. And then the person,
you pay a premium on that, right?
You're like, wow, I'm glad I worked so hard to make this more expensive for myself. So that's why, expectations from the very beginning are very, very important. And ultimately in my situation, it just became clear that expectations, I also find a lot of older practice owners have unrealistic expectations about the financial value of their practice. And so this is another thing to really clarify from the beginning and get in writing from the very beginning, because what they think and what you know and what your accountant knows can be very different things.
Now, I'm curious, this is always an endless debate. Do you create a startup practice? Do you buy an existing practice? Obviously, you went down the route of, taking over an established practice that was, winding down, so to speak. What made you go down that route? Did you consider a startup? Did you feel it was more advantageous to buy an existing office? Was it just, the right opportunity sort of came up? Take us through your sort of decision-making process.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. And I think it really depends on your particular location, what your goals are, and what options are out there for purchase. We looked at doing a startup. We scoped out some locations. We got estimates on equipment and, everything it would take to be up and running. And just weighing those different options, it became really clear that an acquisition was going to be more advantageous, because with a startup, you can make it exactly how you want it, but you're starting at zero. And so you are going to make $0 most likely on day one, which is fine. But the ramp up to full operational capacity can be very much slower than people imagine. And so you have to realize you will not be operating at full capacity for possibly years. And that can be a really big setup. So the advantage of just jumping right in, having a pool of patients, having a team in place, the equipment is already there. It may be dated, it may be old, but you can always replace things as you go along. So, from my perspective, everything can be changed. The team can be changed. The facility can be changed. Your systems can be changed. But why not start with the cash flow? Why not start with a group of patients that you already have that have some loyalty to this business, and then you're not starting with zero.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. We've worked with hundreds of clinics, many different startups, many established practices. I think what people typically underestimate, like you said, is they think I'm going to build a nice office. It's going to be beautiful. I'm going to put that open sign. I'm going to flip it over, say we're open, and then people will start coming in. I just got to do some Facebook posts, got to build a website, do some SEO. And they don't realize that to get those patients, like let's say you're looking at buying a practice with 1,000 active patients, to get those 1,000 patients into your startup is probably going to cost you 2 to 3 times more than buying an existing office, right? If you're trying to do it quickly. So if you have the time and the sort of runway to let it ramp up naturally over 5-10 years, you can do really, really well with a startup. And I've seen dentists who are specialists at creating startups, and generally their timeline is about 5 years. They think, this is going to lose money, even no matter how good of a job I do. In the first 3 years, it's probably going to lose money. 4th year, it's going to start breaking even. 5th year, it's going to start, doing well. And then after that, it's all fantastic. But there's a lot of young dentists who jump into a startup and they contact us and they say, I built a wonderful office. I got all the latest equipment. We've got this, everything's great, beautiful chairs. We just need the patients now. As if
that's kind of critical. That's critical.
Yeah, it's like that should have been where you started, not putting TVs in the ceilings and buying marble granite countertops and things like that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, like even if that office is dated, you're starting much further along, and it's easy to change those things.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my, a lot of clients and colleagues ask, well, how much should I spend on marketing? I just say well, it really depends. If you're doing a startup, be prepared to spend a lot of time and money on marketing initially. It's going to take a really long time to become an established practice. And maybe you always need to do marketing forever and ever. But I'd say very few practices ever get to the point of being so established that they can just rely on word of mouth, referrals and their online reviews and reputation. So marketing would be essential if you're doing a startup. Like I would have that in place the very first thing that I did.
Right. So when you took over this practice, you said it was kind of winding down. Paint the picture for us. How many people were working there? Was there equipment picking up dust? What was it like? What did you take over on day one? Was it a shock? Were you excited about it? Tell us about the practice when you first you took it over. You're the new owner. What did you end up buying? What was on your hands there?
Sure. Well, I would say for anybody looking to buy a practice, just know going into it that there will be unpleasant surprises, no matter how much due diligence you do, no matter how great of a representation you have with a broker or whoever it may be, you will have surprises. And so my situation was no different, of course. The equipment was visible. You could tell it was just quite dated, but it had the essentials. It had what we needed. And it was a little bit of a unique situation because the practice owner's wife essentially did everything. So she worked at the front office and she was the clinical assistant as well. And then they just had a few part-time hygienists. So it was a really very lean and mean, small team, basically as small as you could possibly be. So of course, when the practice owner left, his wife went with him. She wasn't going to just stay without him. So it really went down to just me and a couple part-time hygienists. And so I was fortunate enough to have some great connections from, previous work in dentistry. I was immediately able to bring in some great team members that I knew were going to be able to just get things going right away. So I had that advantage. But lots and lots of interesting surprises. I mean, rarely ever will you get what you think that you paid for. I was told, 1,000 active patients. There's piles and piles and piles of paper charts. Actually, there's only about 300 or less.
Right. Yeah. A lot of practices, their record keeping is, disorganized, right, to say the least.
Yes.
So yeah, on paper, you could definitely, it could look like, there's a lot of activity, but then, you take things over and, a number of our clients tell us is where is everybody? And there's, so is there if you could do it again, obviously there's a lot that you can go through in due diligence. What do you think? I mean, if you had to do it all over again, what would you have paid closer attention to?
You're never going to eliminate
Mhm.
every surprise, but
Yeah.
again, if you could go back in time, it's like, what
Hmm.
would you advise dentists? Like, here's the 2 or 3 things that you really have to make sure are done well or
Hmm.
are
Yeah.
accurate, or you might be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I would look much more closely at the future schedule, what's actually on the books coming up ahead in this practice versus the piles and piles of paper charts or whatever may be in existence, or the 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 digital records in the software of these supposedly active patients, and see if the practice hasn't been actively reappointing and actively keeping patients coming back, it's going to be really hard to recapture those folks and get them back in the schedule once they've already drifted away. So that's one thing I would examine much more closely, is who's truly an active patient that's actually going to move forward with the practice, and how do we engage them and retain them really effectively? Because a difference between 300 and 400 and 500 active patients is a massive difference, because, as you know, every new patient
Absolutely.
acquisition is a process and an expense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on that topic, what did you do to start getting more people through the door? I mean, generally what we see, especially with, startups or dentists who are, getting their first practices, they sort of throw money at anything and everything. They're not really sure what's going to work. They say, okay, let's try a little bit of this, a little bit of this. And, if it works, we'll do more of it. And, if it doesn't, then we can stop. Um, you know, did you follow that approach? Did you have a more strategic
Mhm.
approach, kind of like over
Yeah.
the subsequent 6 months, 12 months? What did you find really got people in the door? And also, what
Mhm.
did you try that, didn't work out, or, it didn't work as well as you had hoped?
Mhm. So the practice previously had basically no marketing going on whatsoever. So it was really just word of mouth and referrals. And so before we ever signed the paperwork, probably 6 months in advance, I found a marketing company and created a strategy with a plan to completely rebrand and completely revamp the look and feel of the practice. So there was an extraordinarily outdated website, horrible, horrible outdoor signage. I mean, there was no visibility, even though it was on a really busy street. So starting to tackle those things from well in advance of the closing date. So before we even signed paperwork, we already had the new website practically, completed. We had marketing begun, so there was, SEO was already in place. We had new signage out front. Everything had been rebranded, so we could start with our own, fresh business cards and everything to hand out to people in the community and anybody that stopped by. We set up a ribbon cutting ceremony with the mayor of the small town. We did everything that
Hmm.
we could to get the word out. We put out a giant banner with balloons and, everything we could to get people to notice that things had changed and that there was new ownership.
Yeah, no, I really like the part where you were tackling these things early, because I've seen a number of dentists where, they feel that marketing is something you start after you're open, as if it's like you're going to flip some sort of light switch or some sort of faucet, and then,
Mm-hmm.
patients are just going to pour out the next day. And I think, like you said, is, if you want to have a great grand opening, or you want to have a really strong, first couple months after taking over the practice, you need to be thinking about how you're promoting it, months before you actually take it over. What
Mm-hmm.
is that new website you're going to put together? What is your SEO plan? How are you going to make connections in the local community to get the word out there that,
Mm-hmm.
there's a new dentist here? Now I'm curious, when you're rebranding, um, did you not fear that, maybe it would alienate some of the existing patients? Sometimes the concern people have is like, there's a new dentist, things are changing. Maybe the
Mm-hmm.
patients really like the way that the old dentist was doing things. Did you run into any issues with the existing patients, or did you find that it was actually like appreciated that, wow, it's nice that things are actually starting to,
Mm-hmm.
modernize, revitalize a little bit? What was sort of the response like?
Yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised how many of the longtime loyal patients stayed with the practice. And I think part of that was I retained the hygiene team. So I had a fantastic hygienist who had been there with all the patients for many years before the
Hmm.
transition. And so I think a lot of the loyalty stayed with keeping that team member in place. She had a great relationship with these patients and helped smooth that transition really well. The sellers were also super supportive, and we hosted an open house where everyone, existing patients could come and meet the new team and meet me, as well as get to say a farewell to the selling doctor and his wife as they went, moved out of state. So I think, and we of course sent a very lovely letter, which, who knows how many people read the letters, but we did everything that we could to really smooth that transition and make it clear that this was a very amicable situation. It's a win-win. He's happy to say goodbye. He's happy that I'm here. And that he gave the practice his blessing moving forward. So that, I think, really to keep those patients. And most of them by that point had a chance to meet me in some sense. And I think that helped to bridge the gap a bit.
I think that's really important.
They really stuck around.
Yeah, I think it's important that, just because you bought a practice that has a certain amount of active patients doesn't mean those people are somehow in a contract to continue with you. It's really important to make a good first impression, because I've seen cases where, the dentist who purchases the practice sort of takes those patients for granted. They think, well, they're going to come in anyway, so you just got to focus on the new patients. But, they go on to make sort of like a really bad first impression. And, discussions come up with, that's, not now how Dr. John used to do things and whatnot. And all of a sudden they have like a massive attrition rate over the subsequent, 6 to 12 months. So, I think it's important to have a good transition plan and to make sure that the dentist who is selling their practice to you is on board for that. You can do sort of like a nice handoff, because just because I've been coming to the old dentist for 5-10 years doesn't mean that I'm ready to switch to you. A number of them might think, well, this is my chance to look for a new dentist. Why?
Exactly.
If he's going to retire, why don't I consider going somewhere else, right? So how do you? What advice would you give to dentists to like make sure that goes smoothly? You mentioned the a nice welcome letter. Collaborating with the dentist on some sort of event, any sort of tips around, how do you ensure a nice, smooth transition where patients like you and they want to continue, at least just to give you a shot, instead of just outright dismissing you. What did you do, that you thought like was really helpful that you recommend other dentists do?
Yeah, essentially, I know it sounds like we changed a lot as far as rebranding, but a lot of that wasn't really visible or important to the existing patients, because unless they drove by and looked at the new sign or, happened to go online and check out the website, which they really wouldn't have had a reason to do. Essentially for them, not much changed other than a few faces. Their longtime hygienist was still present. We didn't change much about what they experienced coming into the practice. And we didn't shake things up too radically initially as far as anything with treatment planning or, how we were presenting things to patients. I'm fairly conservative as it is with, treatment planning. And nobody was really taken aback by, whoa, this is crazy. What's going on? We gradually started implementing more technology that I think was just a positive for everybody. We started using intraoral cameras for every single patient, every single time. And I think that's, there's no downside to that. No patient's going to say, I don't want to see this picture of my tooth. It's just a pure win, and there's no cost to the patient. So no one would ever find that to be objectionable. So we made only positive changes. And I think, we brightened up the office a little bit with some fresh upholstery, and, it was only wins, only positives. We stayed in all the same insurance networks initially. So we didn't rock the boat too much. I guess that would be my biggest piece of advice. If you really want to capture and retain the existing patients, because that is a big part of what you paid for when you bought this practice, is the majority of what you paid for is the existing patient base. Do everything you can to make it easy for them. Very, very easy. And so a big part of that is training your front office team, because they're really the point of contact that's going to interact with these patients the most frequently. And so that point of contact has to be highly customer service sensitive and motivated and very well trained. So you can't just put somebody unfriendly on the phone and expect that these longtime patients are going to stick with you if they're not getting that warm, friendly family experience that they've come to know and love.
Now, when you did these changes, and I agree, I think it's important to kind of like do it slow, just let things settle, get everyone used to how things are, working. Because I've seen a number of dentists where they buy a practice and they think, we're going to shake things up, we're going to change everything, we're going to revitalize this place. And you sort of like, it's like whiplash. The staff are like, whoa, okay, just relax. Like, we got to this stage for a reason. There are some things that we do that, they do work. You're changing way too many things too quickly. And, it's just, you're really rocking the foundation there, right? And it could really upset patients as well. And like you said, the majority of what you paid for is the existing patient base. If you're alienating those people, I mean, you might as well just have done a startup then, right? So, but did you find the staff were supportive? Did you engage with them about, how would you guys like to modernize the practice, or what would you like to see changed? Or did you find that they were resistant to change? What was it like working with the staff in, first couple of months when you took over?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, my situation was perhaps a little bit unusual in that there really was hardly any team that made it through the transition, because there was hardly any team to begin with. So really the main person who had been running things was the dentist's wife. And so she was very kind and was willing to stay on for, I think it was a month or two after the transition, to help get everything set up, to interact with the patients, help us figure out the software and everything. So she was fantastic, and I am so appreciative that she stayed on. But then we knew, of course, that immediately she was going to be transitioning out. So the long-term team member that stayed on was my wonderful hygienist who'd been there for a long time, and she was completely on board with changes. She's super, just a growth mindset person who was excited to see new things brought in and new ideas, new technology. And so, she wasn't a hard sell. It was easy to get her on board with some fresh changes and some new things for the practice.
Now, did you know that going into buying this office, or did you have an opportunity to talk to the staff, to feel out the staff? Because normally, what I've seen, sort of like a number of challenges when you're taking over a practice, is the existing dentist is on board to sell. He's just super excited. The new dentist coming in is excited. And then they finally meet the staff, and they find that the staff are not supportive to any of these changes. So how, did you get a chance to meet with some of the staff? How did you feel them out that they would be on board, or was it just a welcome surprise that they were receptive?
Yeah, no, I was able to meet them in advance. And one thing that I really do encourage in any transition situation, whenever possible, is to have less secrecy. It's just unnecessary. There's all this, weird behind the scenes stuff that goes on. And I think the more transparency you can have in advance with meeting the team, meeting patients, the better. I don't think it goes well to just suddenly surprise people with a massive change. And anytime
here's a new owner. Yeah.
Exactly. So for example, I did things very differently when I sold the practice in 2020. We were very open with the team and patients for months in advance. So the team knew exactly what was going on. We had everything set up for them. They had met the new owners, got to interact with them, go out to dinner. And, it was really clear exactly what was going to happen, and there were no surprises. So I would highly encourage that in any kind of transition situation. Of course, I understand there are times when there's sensitive information that can't be shared, but anytime you can extend that overlap, it's almost always beneficial.
Yeah, because from the staff's point of view, one of the weirdest things I had heard, I remember when I first started getting into the dental field, I was talking to a broker, and he mentioned how, they would do practice evaluations. They'd come in at night. It's like, what do you mean you come in at night? It's like, well, we have to wait until the staff isn't there. It's like, why?
Yeah.
Right? Because we can't let them know that we're selling the practice, right? The whole time I was thinking, but when you do sell, don't you think it's going to be a shock then? Like eventually they're going to figure it out. Isn't it better to start having this conversation early, so that they can, warm up to the idea and look at it like, it's not a bad thing. Like, we're looking, here's what the reason we're trying to sell. I think it can mean great things for you. This is how, this is our transition plan. I think in general, when you look at other industries, let's say, software, which is what Rev Up Dental is involved in. Anyone who would acquire a software company wants to see that the key people on the team are definitely on board for this transition. They're excited about it. They want to stay. They want to improve things, right? You don't just show up and say, "Oh yeah, we now own this business." Everyone continue business as usual. You're as a dentist or really any business owner, you're at the mercy of that team. If they're not on board and they don't stick with you, it could be a disaster. It's just like you said, you're buying all these patients. What happens if they don't stick with you? Then I don't know what you bought.
People need to know what to expect. They don't like surprises. They need to know if there's going to be stability. If you want to have loyalty and you want to retain your team and your patients, you really have to make the expectations clear on both sides and let people know what to expect.
Would you think it's a red flag if you feel that the selling dentist isn't open to the idea of letting their staff know, or having you meet the staff? Like, would that be a warning for you, or
not necessarily, because sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, or is it more just standard practice that you don't typically meet the team?
I think it's tradition and standard practice. I think it maybe is necessary in some scenarios for various reasons. But I think whenever you can avoid that secrecy and surprise, I think it's a win.
Mm-hmm. So you've taken over the practice. The staff are on board. You've redone the signage, the website. You're doing some SEO, some digital marketing work. Was it working? Did you start seeing more patients come in? Or was it just as simple as that? It's like, hey, let's do a little bit of cleanup, get some newer equipment in here. What are some of the challenges you ran into in, let's say, the first year of ownership?
Yeah. One of the mistakes that I see new practice owners, whether it's a startup or an acquisition, one of the most common mistakes I see people make is thinking that they have to do everything themselves. Like, I'm going to DIY the marketing. I'm going to, do my own due diligence on buying this practice. And then who needs a coach or a consultant? I got this, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I see. And ultimately it results in much slower growth in the long term. So luckily, one of the very first things I did as a practice owner that we did as business owners was engage smart people who have done it before. Because why would you want to reinvent the wheel on something that's been done successfully hundreds and thousands of times? So, one of my best decisions as a new practice owner was to engage with dental practice management coaches and a professional marketing team. And I think of anything else that happened in the practice, those were probably the best, initial steps that I took. And so that's why, I believe so much in coaching and why I focus on coaching right now, because I've seen in my own life and in the lives of other practice owners, again and again and again, how trying to DIY it can work, but it will give you so much more stress and it will set you back years. I mean, you can just get ahead faster by paying someone to help you who knows what they're doing. Don't try to renegotiate your lease yourself. My goodness, get an attorney. Like, there's just so many things that professional guidance is so much worth it.
Yeah, we see that a lot too, where, ultimately, everyone's trying to, grow that practice. If the practice was doing $500,000, you want to get to $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is. If you're at 10 patients a month, you want to get to 20. There's many ways to achieve that, right? So absolutely, you can do it all yourself. You can, test a million different ideas, see what works, what doesn't work. But to me, the way I've always visualized it is, ideally, you're trying to go from your current situation to your desired situation, right? You're, $500,000, you want to get to $1 million of production. You're at 10 patients, you want to get to 20, 30. To me, that's kind of like, I'm in New York and I want to go to San Francisco because it's warmer and nicer. There's more sun, right? There's many ways to make that journey. Hypothetically, you could walk there, right? Like, I don't know why you do that, but it's definitely possible. You can face the right direction, put one foot in front of the other. It would take you a very long time. It'd be a very difficult journey. It's a very good chance you'd get lost along the way. And it's not like if you make that journey the hard way, there's an extra reward. The mayor of San Francisco isn't waiting for you to give you a bouquet of flowers because you decided to make this journey in the most difficult way possible. Okay. But, often when so you have options. You can walk, you can drive, you can rollerblade there. But if you kind of ask me, well, what is the fastest, safest, most direct, most reliable, most convenient way to get there, I'd probably recommend that, you should fly, because, rather than taking, as within a matter of hours, you can get there instead of days or weeks or months, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about, like air travel, you've got a lot of high, like very experienced people, like working together to basically build the service. So you've got the pilots, the air traffic controllers, the mechanics, the stewardesses. You have these incredibly experienced, talented, passionate people with all of this technology that they've built to basically make this happen. So when you talk about, get a good lawyer, get a good broker, get a good consultant, like these are key people you need to get you from A to B quickly, safely, reliably, directly, right? And when we see people trying to do it themselves, it's like somebody trying to, hitchhike their way and rollerblade their way and bike their way. It's like, look, sure, if you like that, if you want to challenge yourself, go for it, if that gives you satisfaction. But at the end of the day, if I can get from 10 patients to 30 patients in a third of the time, what value what is the point of going through suffering to get there slower, right? And I think for a lot of people, it's a matter of pride. For some people, they're not really sure who to trust, because, to be fair, there's a lot of people that will promise you the world and then, under deliver. So what was your process for, finding a good team, finding good coaches, good marketing companies? I mean, how did you avoid, getting ripped off or, getting screwed over? Or was it just luck, or did you go through a process of evaluating people that, you think is repeatable?
Yeah. So I relied mostly on recommendations from friends and colleagues. And I listened to a lot of podcasts. So a lot of the resources that I have encountered through, in dentistry have been guests on podcasts that I've listened to. I don't know how many hours of dental podcasts I've listened to in my life, but it's an absurd amount. But it's resulted in a lot of great resources that I would not have come across otherwise. So that was really how I encountered a lot of the best in the field. And then from talking to people that I knew personally. So, and then of course, always don't make assumptions, get things in writing. Anytime that you're about to engage with a dental CPA, or whether it's an attorney, make sure you understand exactly what you're getting for what you're paying. If you're hiring a CPA, you might think they're going to be looking at your monthly expenses, but if you don't know that for sure, they might just be doing your taxes. Like, there's no way to know unless you ask a lot of questions and you interview them and you have a good feeling interpersonally it's going to work well together. So for example, hiring a coach, you might hear somebody speak at a dental event and they're super charismatic and they know everything about dental practice management, and so you engage this company, but that person is probably not going to be your actual coach. So find out who's going to be your actual coach, talk to them one-on-one, and make sure that you guys are a good fit interpersonally.
Now, when you're doing coaching, do you sort of, how do you involve the staff? Because to some extent, what if you get along well with your coach or the consulting company, but your staff, isn't seeing eye to eye with you? Or did you find that, like, no, they were really on board? I mean, we've had it both ways. We've seen practices that say, we've always wanted to know how to do a better job at this. We're really exciting that the dentist is willing to invest in like learning material and training, because like we do want to do a good job. We're just not sure how. I've also seen cases where, we would recommend our clients, like, hey, try this coaching company. Like, obviously there's some internal challenges here, only to have the staff really shut it down instantly and say, oh, we've been doing this for 20 years. We don't need coaches. I actually know more than they do. Did you run into that issue at all? Or, how would you tackle that? How do you get the team on board?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I've seen the same thing you have. I've seen it work really well in some situations and really not well in some situations, where the coach actually comes in and is working directly one-on-one with the team. So Indy practices is actually quite a bit different. in the sense that it's much more like executive coaching to the leader. So essentially the coaching is all directed at the leader to make the leader stronger and to make the leader more effective so that they can lead their team. And the reason that we focus on the leader, first off, we're passionate about leadership, but the main reason is logistics. So the one person who is guaranteed to always be there and to not get fired and not leave is you, the practice owner, the leader. And so if you're constantly bringing in coaches and consultants to train your team is going to turn over, especially these days. They're going to come and go every few years, and then all that knowledge can evaporate. All this, you could pay $100,000 for someone to come in and put all these systems in place in your office. And then next year, half your team moves on to other things. And then what happens? You got to start all over. But if you have that knowledge and those leadership capabilities, and it resides with you, and you have the capacity to lead and train your team daily on a daily basis, it can never leave, and it will always be there with your practice. So that's why we focus so much less on, hey, I'm going to sit down with, Jan at the front office and show her how to handle phone calls. Well, Jan might not be there next week, but guess what? You, the practice owner, can listen to phone calls from your entire team forever and coach them on how to do it better. So it's things like that.
Are you struggling to grow your dental practice? Do you look at your schedule and see that it's constantly filled with holes? Are you tired of investing months and thousands of dollars on marketing and consultants only to see little to no return? Discover a smarter way to grow your practice with RevUp Dental's AI-powered software. At RevUp Dental, we analyze hundreds of dental practices across North America and hundreds of thousands of new patient calls and interactions in order to help dentists better understand what's really holding their practice back from growth and what they can do about it. From reviewing how your staff handle new patient calls and coaching them on how to secure more appointments, all the way to analyzing your practice's reputation online and helping you become the top choice for patients in your area. With RevUp Dental, you'll receive a clear roadmap and support for how to take your practice to the next level. Think of it like Google Maps or Waze. You plug in where you want to go, we find the fastest and most efficient route, and we give you step-by-step guidance and support on how to get there. See what other dentists are saying and book a demo at revupdental.com.
Every time we've seen practice,
a lot of common denominator here?
Exactly, right? So, no, I think that's really important because we've seen a lot of cases where, the dentist wants training for their staff, but when you bring the idea of, I think, you could use some training in terms of how to manage by numbers or how to, inspire your team a bit better, or, just business 101 elements, like things that you can't just delegate to somebody else. It's important that you as the owner know to have these skills. They say, oh, no, I'm too busy for that. Oh, I don't think I need that. It's like, meanwhile, it's actually the person that needs it the most, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We like to think of it upstream effects. Like, why deal with the downstream fallout? That's incredibly time consuming and wasteful of energy in a sense, when you could just deal with the upstream problem, which is 99% lack of leadership skills, or just, maybe we don't have the right mindset. We don't have the right growth mindset in place for the leader to begin with. That's upstream. You can save a lot of time and energy and stress and heartache by just dealing with things proactively before we're trying to coach one team member on how to do this one thing in the office. That's not an effective use of the time.
So what are some leadership skills you had to learn, right? So obviously you've taken this office over, you started building a team of experts around you to kind of help support, get you from, A to B, so to speak. What are some important skills that you learned that you feel, maybe you weren't really aware of how important they were? Like, what would you recommend dentists who, they're just starting their first practice, it's a startup, or they bought a practice? Like, these are kind of the skills you want to focus on. Like, because leadership is a very broad thing. Like, what does that mean? Do you come in and you give everyone high fives? Do you come in with a coffee? Do you put a smile on your face every day? Like, what does leadership mean to you?
I think one of the toughest things for any leader to embrace is setting really clear expectations and then holding the team accountable to meeting those expectations. It sounds so simple, but so rarely rarely, and this was something that I spent a lot of time honing my skills on myself, deliver really clear expectations where there is no ambiguity. We're not assuming anything on the part of the other person. We're spelling it out as clearly as it possibly can be said, that this is what's expected. This is your job description. This is what's expected in your role. And I'm going to actively hold you accountable. I'm going to be, we like to say, inspect what you expect. So we can't just expect things and then not follow up to see if they're happening. So, I'm sure you see this a lot where practice owners,
Absolutely.
They just assume a lot. They assume, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, Samantha, she's so friendly. I'm sure every phone call that comes in, she's getting them scheduled and they're loving her and everything. Like, you have to inspect what you expect. Have you listened to your phone calls? Do you know what Samantha's saying on the phone? You will be very unpleasantly surprised what Samantha's saying on the phone a lot of the time, because you're not checking things out. You're not monitoring. You're not holding her accountable. And you probably never set clear expectations in the first place, which is giving her a system to follow, training on how to actually handle these, difficult questions that patients are going to ask when they call. And then we're just hoping for the best. And that's, I think, the biggest pitfall that I see. Owners, there's a lot to focus on. I'm not going to downplay how busy and stressful practice ownership is, but your main job as a leader is to lead. It's not to, whatever else you think you may be supposed to be doing. Your primary responsibility is leading your team. And so if you're not setting them up for success with expectations in the beginning and then making sure they're following through with those things, nothing is going to function well in your practice.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think, that applies to any kind of business. I know that, in the beginning, as sort of business owners, you have a lot on your plate, and the priority and sort of the targets changes all the time, right? And, today, this is like the most important initiative. We're going to work on this. And then, 2 weeks go by, you get sidetracked with something else. And your people are constantly dealing with whiplash, right? Because there's just a lot in your head that you assume is obvious to everyone else. But it's not until you're on the receiving end of working for someone like that you realize like how chaotic and stressful and unnerving it is. You never know what's going to happen. And most people, the sort of defense mechanism is just to stop caring. You just kind of go with the flow because it's so unpredictable. You don't know where it's going to be. You smile and you nod. Okay, the dentist is excited about this whatever initiative. You just say sure, whatever. In 2 weeks, he's going to forget about it. So you train these people whether you want to or not. You just train them in a really bad way to just not care and not pay attention. And you build this sort of business where they all become yes men, because it's like, well, what's the answer? Like nothing's clear. Everything changes all the time. We don't know what's going on. So you just smile and nod and you come in and you do the best job you can, right? And then when the dentist finally takes a look at what's going on at the front desk, right? So when we record tens of thousands of new patient calls every month, we share these recordings with these clients and we say, listen to how new patients are actually being talked to and put yourself in their shoes and tell me whether you'd come here. Right. And they're shocked. They're like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is my staff. And it's like, but can you blame them? Have you ever sat down and said, hey, let's agree with how do we want things done? How do we want people to be treated? How should we answer the phone? What are the top 10, 20 most common questions that come up? How do we want to answer them? Right. And that's why it's not surprising when, if 3 people call and they ask the same question to 3 different receptionists that work there, they'll get 3 different answers. And in fact, if they ask the same receptionist the same question the next day, they'll get a different answer then. And this is why the business has so many ups and downs, right? Like it's just a chaotic mess. And I think it all starts from the top. And like you said, it's, giving clear direction, clear expectations. So did you write these things down? Like, did you go through the job descriptions, the expectations? Like, do you think it's important to put this down in writing, or, how, you've taken over practice, you want to do things right. Where do you begin? Do you look at everyone's job titles and job descriptions? Like, how do you start this process?
Yeah. 100%. So to circle back to one thing that we were just talking about with the new patient phone calls, we have actually found that was such a high area of need that we've actually created online training specifically for teams on this. So this is one of the few areas in which we do actually interact directly with teams, is to do a live online new patient phone training, because we found, oh my goodness, this is just something that honestly most practice owners don't have the training themselves to train their teams on. So this is something that we do actually offer because it's such an area of need. But to get back to your most recent question about how did we actually get all of this documented and clear and in writing? Yes, I had revamped everything. I mean, there never really was a job description in writing to begin with in this office ever. It had never existed, nor was there any kind of employee handbook. There was no org chart. There was no nothing, because nothing had ever been put into a system or documented. And so as a team, we would meet every single week. We would meet for a 90-minute meeting every week, which, you know, people might think, oh my goodness, how could you fit that into your busy schedule? And I thought that too initially, but after having instituted that, I couldn't ever have imagined going back. It was the most essential part of our entire week. And so we would meet together as a team with a very organized format, followed an agenda every single week, and we would tackle each system one by one. So we'd say, okay, let's go through what is our system for new patient phone calls. Step one, step two, how do we handle this? What could be better? Maybe we need a phone in the break room. Maybe, what was it that's going to make this more successful? So we would tackle these systems one at a time. What's our system for asking for reviews? All right, who's going to do it? What are they going to say? Let's practice it. We're going to role play. I'm the patient. You're the team member. We're going to go back and forth and practice. Hey, I give a compliment. That's the trigger for asking for a review. And now you're going to say, oh, thanks for sharing that. It would be so great if you could go online and blah, blah, blah. So we hammered out the details as a team on a weekly basis. And yeah, sometimes it was, I'm not going to say it's easy. It's a lot of work, but we got it all down in writing. And eventually we had, I think, over 20 systems documented in writing. This is how we do it here. This is how we do a handoff. When I walk into the operatory, this is what you say. This is what should be up on the computer screen. This is what happens when I walk out. This is what happens when we take a patient up to the front desk. I know it sounds like, how could I ever have time to get all those details down? But the time that it's that whole concept of being proactive and thinking upstream. The more that you're planning ahead and solving these problems before they become problems, the less drama, the less stress, the less chaos, the fewer unknowns you will have in your practice, and the more smoothly everything is going to flow.
Yeah, it's a lot like compound interest, honestly. It just seems like, it's going to take a lot of work. Is that really going to change much if I document, how do we greet a new patient? What do we say exactly, right? But they do compound over time. And generally what you see is the practices that are really successful, it's not that they're doing anything radically different or really, creative or, like, wow, no one's ever thought of this. They're doing a lot of really simple, basic things well and very consistently. So the perception is that like what do you think it's like in a practice that is maybe the top 10% of best performing practices in the area, and they think, oh, everyone's really motivated and there's like they're always like trying new things out and they got the latest technology and they're forward thinking. And, like, well, what do you think it's like in a practice that is like really struggling? And they think, oh, probably everything's just like, low energy, nobody cares anymore, no one's trying anything. And it's funny because it's kind of the opposite. I mean, the practices that do really well is just like slow, steady, very, very consistent. They're not doing anything crazy, very predictable. It's just like when you look at, fitness, it's like the people that are in the best shape, they're not constantly trying all kinds of nutritional products to find the magic one that works and it gets them six-pack abs. It's like they're just very consistently waking up early, going for that run, eating the right things. It's almost boring, right? And that's the thing. I think that a lot of people don't understand. Like, they're looking for something new, something fresh, something exciting. And you see that with marketing all the time, oh, I've heard this new strategy with AI and social media, we can try this and that. And we tell them, it's like, no, just ask for reviews. Okay. Just keep doing that more than your competitors are doing it. we'll keep creating a little bit better content. We'll keep collecting more patient testimonial videos, like that's it. Like, we'll just keep doing this. And if you're doing it for the next 3 to 6 months, we'll probably double your revenue. And they think,
Exactly.
but like, it can't be it. Like, there's gotta be something else. Like, they're looking for some complex, strategy. And here's the thing, there's a
Yeah.
lot of people that will try to sell you that excitement, that, wow, this, like, we've just come up with something that no one's done before. We're mixing AI and blockchain and this, and it's very revolutionary. And I'm thinking, like, what the heck are you talking about? Like,
I
the way you're
know,
gonna double
exactly.
this business is like very simple. You just got to stick to the
Exactly.
plan. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, my co-founder at Indy Practices and I, we identified these 6 essential areas that apply to all practices. And they're really simple. They're nothing crazy or complicated. And they can be replicated over and over and over again. And it's really focusing on these 6 things. It's leadership and culture, efficiency systems, financial systems, the clinical offerings that you have, networking and promotion, which is marketing basically, and the team structure. So that's your HR stuff. And once you get those things in place, you don't have to be creative, so to speak. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just continue to do things. Of course, you're always learning, always improving, but you get those basic systems in place, and then you just replicate and you reiterate and you perfect it.
So how did it help your practice? So ultimately, things grew. Where did you get to in the end? Like, what was the success? Was it worth it? How much did you grow the practice? Sort of like, tell us, where did it get to in the end?
Yeah, so the practice grew tremendously, and it happened much more quickly than I anticipated. So we started out with under 300 active patients. Even that's a little debatable. So they were, and they were fantastic and loyal and wonderful. And a lot of them stayed with me the entire time. So we immediately had a marketing plan in place, as I mentioned, months in advance even of closing. And we were just constantly every day doing those same boring things, asking for reviews, asking for referrals, send us your family and friends. And we eventually ended up with triple the number of true active patients, more than triple. And then the revenue more than tripled as well. So we started out, as I mentioned, it was really tiny. It was on the verge of closing down, in fact. But in the end, it was $1 million practice. The production, our final year was over $1 million. So, and it was
Awesome.
nothing crazy. Like you said, it's very, very basic. Didn't do any unusual, clinical offerings, anything unusual as far as the structure. It was extremely boring in a
Yeah.
very good way.
And that's what the message we try to get across to a lot of dentists is, stop falling for all these exciting, sort of like get rich quick, sort of scams, right? It's growing a business is not complicated. It's really just like watching paint dry. It's about doing some really basic things and just sticking with it for the long term. But unfortunately, a lot of people think, you got to get really creative. You got to get really risky. You got to do something that's like very different from what everyone else is doing. And you'll just spend a lot of time and money kind of like on a wild goose chase. Most success stories are like, yeah, it was just these 2, 3, 4 basic things every day. And then, a few years go by and you double, triple, quadruple the size of that business, and, you can retire basically. But the ones who are constantly chasing the, next crazy idea to, get them to the top of Google, the ones who fall for what these marketing companies are trying to sell, or consultants who promise, if you implement my, 3-step formula, we're going to double your business in the next couple of weeks. I mean, you see these commercials on TV of, they've discovered some magic herb in like the jungles of Thailand that, will get you 6-pack abs in 2 weeks, and then you end up taking those pills and all it does is give you diarrhea. And it's like, well, are you surprised? Right. So in the end, you sold the practice and you decided to go into, open up Indy practices. So tell us about that transition. What made you want to switch from being a practice owner to a consultant?
Yeah, so my co-founder Mark and I had been in leadership roles for many years, and also taken on a lot of mentorship. I was part-time faculty at the local dental school, and I was part of a local dental mentoring program, and really enjoyed that aspect of being a dentist and being able to help others, grow their practices and to gain their skills. And so we realized, wow, that's really cool. That's really fun to be able to help see others grow too. And I also just felt, wow, I have invested a lot of time and money with hiring experts, as we talked about, bringing in coaches and consultants. And some was great, some could have been better. And I felt like, hey, you know what? We can do this. We can do this maybe a little better in some ways. And we can make this more achievable. We can make this something that's not as intrusive into the practice and into these dentists' lives as what I experienced, where you have to shut down your practice for a whole week and take the team across the country and, rent out a ballroom or whatever it is, just these exorbitant things that some coaches and consultants expect their clients to do.
Absolutely. We see that all the time.
We don't have, I'm not going to force you to lose 5 days of production because we're, coming in and working with your team. No, this is not intrusive. It fits into your lifestyle because you can be in your home office doing a Zoom call with us. That's so much more doable for most people who are busy. They have a family, they have, they're juggling a lot. And it's also at a much more affordable price point because, like I said, we're not flying across the country to see you. We're not shutting down your business. It's just a much more doable thing for a lot of people. And so we just realized this opportunity that didn't exist, as we had seen it. And so we realized we could bring, the leadership coaching skills of my co-founder and all the dental practice management knowledge that I had gained over this time and bring it together into something that could really effectively serve clients and help them to grow their practices really quickly, and to not just grow their practices, but to make their own lives better, take back their time, manage their time a little better, and to see these skills that transcend, practice ownership, communication skills and leadership skills that will be with you for the rest of your lives. Being able to have that tough conversation that you were scared to have before, being able to lead a team meeting effectively when you were intimidated by that before. Those are things that stick with you forever.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned something where it's like a lot of traditional consulting is very extravagant. I mean, I've been shocked sometimes to hear what some of these, seminars cost. I mean, they're flying everyone out to Vegas for, what really just amounts to a very fun, but a very expensive party, a lot of razzle dazzle. It's super exciting. It's almost like, you're injecting all this energy, but then, they come back to work on Monday morning. And I mean, it's just business as usual. Nothing really changes, right? It's like, what are you really paying for there? And I think that, I always have a lot of respect for people that have walked the walk, right? So it's easy to give advice about, here's how you can grow your business. Here's what you can do to, but until you're in the shoes of that business owner, and especially in dentistry, it's a little bit more difficult because in a traditional business like ours, where, we're building software, we're working with, digital products. I can sit back and look at KPIs and like work on managing the business. But in a dental office, I mean, 90% of your time, you're actually doing the work in the business. You don't really have a lot of time to sort of like work on the business, right? So, you can't really afford to shut things down for a week to do some, spiritual retreat, as if like somehow you're going to come in back Monday morning, and like major things are going to change. It's a lot of small little things you need to do gradually to steer that ship in a better direction. And I think that, having gone through it, growing your own practice, like you said, there's a lot you can get out of coaching, but some of it is great, some of it is not. And what I've always seen Indy practices like is more of a very streamlined sort of like coaching model, where it's like there's no razzle dazzle. We're not popping champagne in Vegas. Okay. If you have that kind of money to spend, you're spending it in the wrong place. Let's just tackle the few little things that we can do day to day, week to week different. The slow, maybe a little bit boring, But the little things that, if this happens consistently, this is where you're really going to see results from, right?
Absolutely. And another thing that I think practice owners rarely find time to do that we can help them with is to really look at their numbers. They might look at the end of the day sheet and they might say, oh, okay, well, I produced this much. But I will tell you, most practice owners really don't get a chance to look at and understand their overhead or their statistics on reappointment percentage or how they're doing on case acceptance. There's all these things going on behind the scenes that are urgent. They're not urgent, but they're super important. And so practice owners don't get to them. Like you were saying, they don't have time to work on the business because they're so busy working in the business. They're in the operatory, but they don't realize, oh my goodness, this operatory right now, the overhead is outrageous. They don't realize how much what's going on behind the scenes with the numbers. So that's another thing that we really love to help our clients dig into is to, this ridiculous document that your CPA just sent you. Let's make some sense of that. Let's make this a nice little visual pie chart so you can actually see where all of your hard-earned, revenue is going and what's happening with that. What's left over for you at the end of the month because you're working really hard and you're taking time away from your family, be here with your patients every day. And you deserve to know what's going on and to see where all that ends up at the end of each month.
Yeah, there's a lot of holes in the bucket, so to speak. And some of them are quite small and quite invisible. And you touched upon something interesting, like how many patients do you rebook, reschedule? How many cancellations do you have? We track these stats for dentists as well. And they're always shocked at the numbers. Almost every office that we worked with, we asked them, hey, do people call to cancel an appointment? Obviously, yes. Okay. How many? Well, it depends, right? It's like, well, what percentage of new appointments that you booked end up being a cancellation? They don't really know, right? If you say, okay, well, when someone calls to cancel, let's say, hey, I'm really sick. I've got, a cough. I'm not sure if I can come in, or my child got sent home from daycare. I can't make tomorrow. I've got to cancel. Does your staff offer them another appointment slot? Do they say, okay, no problem, we'll cancel tomorrow, I've got an opening next Friday, does that work? All the dentists are convinced that this is happening. In fact, when you ask the staff, it's almost like an insult. It's like, what do you mean, you don't think we know how to do our jobs? Of course we do this, right? And then we play a recording for them of, here's a scenario where they called in sick, their child was sent home from daycare, and your receptionist said, okay, no problem. Okay, bye. Right? And the doctor's shocked. And then they say, oh, well, no, it's not that we forgot that patient. This is a bad patient. She cancels all the time. We didn't do that. We didn't rebook her on purpose. Okay, maybe that's true. Okay, here's another call, and another one, and another one, and another one. It's like, are these all terrible patients, right? And it's at that point the dentist sort of dawns on them that, like, oh, what's going on here, right? They're putting in a lot of work, you're putting a lot of water into that bucket. And at the end of the day, you're just like, where did it all go? I don't understand. Where, like, how come, we have this huge overhead? Why do we have so many holes in the schedule? And it all starts with tracking those little metrics. So tell me more about that. Like, what kind of metrics do you, encourage dentists to start taking a closer look at that maybe they're not paying attention to?
Yeah, well, one resource that I would definitely ask listeners to check out is on our website, right in the upper right. As soon as you click on our website, you'll see it says resource library. And one of the documents that we just added there is about overhead. And so some of the statistics or KPIs that you just mentioned are going to be highlighted in that document. So it's a great resource for anyone who is wondering, like, wow, where did all my revenue go? How do I understand this mess of paperwork that my accountant keeps sending me every month or every quarter? That's a great resource for helping to understand some of the KPIs that really matter. But I would also recommend, there's a lot of great resources. I love Dental Intel. There's also Practice by Numbers. There are a lot of great dashboards that can really help you see the data in a new way, in a more presentable way, in a more understandable way. It's pretty hard to track reappointment with just your typical practice management software. It can be done, but it's more difficult. And these dashboards can help you do that more easily. But all that data is useless if you never look at it and if you don't make any changes based on the information that you're finding. So I like to keep it simple. I just ask that, our clients just send us 4 key pieces of data every month, and that's the net production, the collections, so we can see immediately what's your collections percentage, how well is your team doing collecting money when that patient is in your office, how well are they handling claims over time, insurance claims. So we track those 2 statistics, and one that I'm really big on is new patient numbers. I love to see the new patient numbers going up, and it's a very big indication of what's going on behind the scenes at the office. There's really an infinite number of useful and interesting statistics that you could collect about your dental practice, but they're really only helpful if you're actually monitoring them and making changes based on what you see. If you just report every month and you don't look at it, it doesn't help you. So we like to keep it super simple. We don't ask for a ton of reporting from our clients because we know they're busy, and we know that really there's only a few key actions that you need to be taking in any given month. So we ask them to send what is their net production, what's their collections, so we can see how well the team is doing collecting at the front desk, and then how well their insurance claims being processed. Then we want to see new patient numbers. This is huge. So we want to see how many new patients they're getting per provider every month. And we want to see that number going up over time. If we don't see improvement here, we know, wow, we need to work on getting more reviews. We need to work on internal referrals. What's going on with marketing right now? How's the team handling phone calls? Those are big indicators that point us with new patients there. And then we basically track, we look at their reviews. I check that every month, see how they're doing with their online reviews. And then listening to phone calls. So I love to listen to phone calls. I learn so much about what's going on in the practice by listening to what's happening behind the scenes. So those are some of the key things that we ask for. Now, if a client has more data, love to look at that. I'm happy to read P&Ls all day. I'm happy to look at dental intel reports. We read, any information that you can share is great, but we're not going to burden you with a lot of reporting.
Yeah, so for those listening, the website is indypractices.com. And right at the top, they have a new resource library section, and you can find those documents there. And I agree. I think it really starts with, getting a better grasp of the little details that are happening day in, day out. Your patient management system, in many ways, is kind of like your QuickBooks report. It kind of tells you what has happened. It doesn't really track the metrics that are going to lead to those month-end results, right? So yes, we can see how much money we made, how many patients we saw, but you won't understand what could we have done differently to see more patients or to have a stronger month, right? So there's a difference between lag metrics and lead metrics. So lag metrics are like at the end of the month, this is how much money we brought in. But the lead metrics are going to tell you, this is what we're doing that are going to lead to that end result. And that's really what you want to be tracking. That's what's going to give you an indication whether, you're going to have a great month or a weak month. How many cancellations are you getting? What are you doing about those cancellations? How are you getting people back in the door? How many review requests are you sending out, right? So yeah, I think like tracking numbers is really important. For a lot of dentists, they just don't know where to begin, I believe. So I think this is a great resource. I highly encourage everyone to check it out. So indypractices.com, click the resource library at the top of the page, and you will find quite a few documents here. But start with the first one, the overhead.
Yeah, and a lot of those. So I created a lot of those videos, and my co-founder created them with the intention of them being used in team meetings or with your team, because a lot of times practice owners, they're so busy, they don't have time to put together the resources. I know my team is not doing well with XYZ. Okay, I could find some random video on YouTube, or I could, put together a training myself. I just don't have time to do that. So we wanted to make these very short, succinct videos. Most of them are under 5 minutes, so that they can be shared with a team member, either one-on-one, or you could even just have the team member watch it on their own, or watch it, even better, watch it together as a team, as part of your team meeting, so that you have those resources that you can all, it's kind of like having a guidebook. You have something that you can all refer to. And then each of those videos comes with a written document that provides even more information. So some tangible examples, real life. I love, people hate scripting, but it's just really a framework for verbal skills, having some communication skills and some excellent lines to use. can be really helpful in bridging the gap between, where this team member is today and where you really need them to be.
Fantastic. So what is the best way that people can get in touch with you guys at Indy Practices? We mentioned the website, so indypractices.com. Is there a YouTube channel they can check out, or how do you recommend they sort of like take the first step to, if these, what we talked about today is something they want to kind of explore a little bit further?
Yeah, the best way to do that is just reach out directly to info@indypractices.com. So just email us info@indypractices.com, and we're happy to do a 30-minute complimentary strategy session with anybody who just has some either questions about their own practice or questions about coaching, what that entails. We're always happy to chat, or just by email is fine too. But you can also check us out on YouTube. We have Indy Practices YouTube channel on Facebook and on Instagram as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. You've shared a lot of really wonderful tips and knowledge. I really do encourage people to check this out. There's no razzle dazzle here. It's all very streamlined, efficient coaching that's actually run by a dentist who's been in your shoes. She's doesn't just talk the talk, they have walked the walk. And we've definitely gotten a lot of value out of their resources as well. There's a lot of things that we've learned about, internal operations at a practice that we never were like that knowledgeable about. So definitely check them out, indypractices.com. Thanks again. It was a fantastic chat. And yeah.
Thanks a lot, Nick. It was so much fun chatting with you today. I really appreciate it.
Are you struggling to grow your dental practice? Do you look at your schedule and see that it's constantly filled with holes? Are you tired of investing months and thousands of dollars on marketing and consultants only to see little to no return? Discover a smarter way to grow your practice with RevUp Dental's AI-powered software. At RevUp Dental, we analyze hundreds of dental practices across North America and hundreds of thousands of new patient calls and interactions in order to help dentists better understand what's really holding their practice back from growth and what they can do about it. From reviewing how your staff handle new patient calls and coaching them on how to secure more appointments, all the way to analyzing your practice's reputation online and helping you become the top choice for patients in your area. With RevUp Dental, you'll receive a clear roadmap and support for how to take your practice to the next level. Think of it like Google Maps or Waze. You plug in where you want to go, we find the fastest and most efficient route, and we give you step-by-step guidance and support on how to get there. See what other dentists are saying and book a demo at revupdental.com.